Our topic for today is 2SLGBTQ+ tech perspectives and insights. During this panel discussion, we'll unpack the findings of the 2SLGBTQ+ Insights report, recently released by BC Tech in collaboration with the Discovery Foundation, and discuss the 15 key recommendations. I'd like to start by thanking the three of you for supporting our research project as community partners. First, I guess a really great question is I'd love to know what sparked your interest in getting involved in the project. And maybe I'll start with you, Lidi.
Sure, thank you. So as Erica mentioned, I'm Lidi. I'm the communications manager at Eastside Games. We're a mobile game company that makes narrative-driven idle games such as Trailer Park Boys, RuPaul, and just announced The Office. I've been at the studio for about 9 years, and in that time, I've built the studio, championed and created the culture, and it's something I'm extremely passionate about. And this is a big part of that. So what sparked our interest in the project is that we need to do better. We can always be improving. We can always be working towards being better. We don't have equal representation in our senior management. That's a huge issue, but we are starting to gain a foothold in the representation of queer people within our development teams, which I think is hugely important. So I just wanted to learn more. That's why I wanted to be a part of this. We can only make amazing, accessible games if we have input from all different voices. So that was the main reason for us.
Wonderful. I'll pass it over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Erica. Hey, everybody. Very excited to be here. I was thrilled to hear when BC Tech was going to start doing this research. I think my experience in tech in the beginning was very bro-y, and my organization is very forward-thinking though, and so we've really advanced how the culture shows up throughout the years, and we have a massive focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so the research and being a part of it made sense. And I guess my hope for it was to be able to put some documentation out there on best practices for other tech companies to make tech a really safe and wonderful place for other queer folks. So just thrilled that I got to be a part of it and excited to share more of it with you today.
That's awesome. And you, Angel.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah, well, for us, it was really a twofold aspect. We wanted to assess how Hootsuite is adopting the 2SLGBTQ plus inclusion best practices and see where we stand. It's a journey. We've been walking it for a while, but we recognize we still have some room to grow, and we wanted to identify areas of improvement and build a roadmap that would take us forward. At the same time, we believe this opportunity was a great way to collaborate with other tech companies. We're not alone in this together, and we recognize that we are in this journey together, and we can make a lot out of it. We support each other. One of our guiding principles is to give back to the community where we live and work. And we're proud to be able to show the world what we're doing, but at the same time, grow and continue to improve together.
That's awesome. Thank you. And we're so pleased to have all of you come on board and support the project. And so I know we shared the link to the report in the chat, but for anyone who hasn't kind of read the full report in detail, through the research project, we conducted a number of surveys of both 2SLGBTQ plus employees in the tech sector, as well as HR representatives. In addition, we hosted a roundtable to gain further insights and validate some of those research results. And from that research, there were kind of 5 themes identified and then 15 recommendations. So we'll talk about maybe the 5 themes first. And the 5 that were identified were limited understanding within tech workplaces, with only 13% of respondents noting a high level of understanding within their workplace, subtle forms of discrimination in the workplace, and 60% reported that they saw subtle forms of discrimination in their workplace, hesitation to share their concerns and challenges with HR, a gap between policy and practice, and a lack of diversity data. So given those kind of 5 themes that came out of the research, I'd love to hear from our panel. What are your thoughts on what you read around those 5 themes? And is there one that surprised you or maybe there was one that validated what you had suspected to be true. And I'll go in the same order, passing to you, Lidi, first.
Sure. So in terms of the 5 themes, I think that the hesitance to approach HR was the most upsetting. We don't have a lot of queer or LGBTQ representation on our leadership or on our HR team, so that might be part of it. But I would like to think that people feel comfortable coming forward. So, I think that's a priority for us, is making sure that people feel safe. And that's something that, they feel comfortable doing. The last one, the lack of diversity, I think comes from the lack of data. And at Eastside Games, we don't require people disclose their sexual orientation or anything of that nature. So we're just kind of relying on what people voluntarily give. So I think that I don't know how to solve that problem. That's why I'm here. I want to learn, So that's how I feel about that. The last one I wanted to mention was policy and practice. Like, I'm like a zero policy type of leader. I just think that it's a thing that you sign and you never look at again. So it's really what, walking the walk and actually showing those things in how you do your day to day, and not just having a document that you sign for HR. So those are my thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think that might be a good segue over to you, Anthony. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I know you're a relatively data-driven organization, so curious to hear what you thought.
Yeah, a very data-driven organization. And last year we embarked on trying to get the wheels moving around, actually starting to collect some of this diversity data. And I can tell you it was a long process to make sure that we're doing it the right way, to be asking the questions the right way, to make sure that we're maintaining the right level of anonymity on those surveys. And so, it was a long process for us, and I think it's still ongoing. We're driving folks to try to provide that information to us so that we can start to understand, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? What does the complement of folks look like who join us? How wide is the spectrum of people that work for us? And so we're continuing to try to drive that forward. And I think it's going to be a very long-term project for us, but I'm glad that we've started doing that, and then we start to have some data to understand where we're at. But yeah, it's a big project for sure. And it's one that, I think is very valuable, but needs to be done with the utmost care and attention to make sure that, the results are right, and that you're also safeguarding people's identities. Because I think for a lot of us in the queer community, not everyone is out, and we don't want to be outing people at work. We don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. We want this to be a positive experience and a way to drive positive change. So there's lots of things to think about as you go through that process, but I think it's certainly worth it. For the other themes, I also was very sad to see about the hesitation for folks coming to HR. I'm a queer person on the HR team. I don't think I've ever had another one reach out to me about something. I hope that means that there's not that many things going on in our organization, but I could be totally wrong with that. I'm not naive enough to believe that nothing has ever happened. But yeah, there's certainly a limited understanding. And I think over the last couple of years, we've really tried to do more education for folks around this. And I think for many tech companies, it comes from a place of, you're hiring progressive people who in many cases are aligned with this, but in many cases haven't done the work to start to understand more about the wide spectrum of folks that are on the 2SLGBTQ spectrum. And even for me, I'm always learning. There's a lot of identities out there right now, which is great. I'm happy to celebrate all of them. And I think sometimes it takes all of us a little bit more time and a little bit more of our own energies to really dive into that and sort of understand a bit more of how people show up and what their identity means.
That's awesome. Thanks, Anthony. And yeah, I think the data is, there are challenges, and it's interesting. I think we might come back to you later down the road and ask you to share some of your, key learnings once you've gone through this a bit further, going through the data piece, because I think, the intention that it's helping understand representation. It's ensuring that we're tracking, we're understanding our progress across time, ensuring there's no discrimination on pay equity or anything like that happening that is under the surface and not being tracked. But yeah, it comes with certain challenges, certainly. I'd love to pass it over to you, Angel, to hear your thoughts.
Of course, thank you. For me, let me start with the one that didn't surprise me, and that was the subtle discrimination in the workplace. As a gay person myself, I've been privy to this firsthand. I remember the first time I got a job in corporate world. I get on day one, I'm with my new manager, and she goes, "Well, what's your boyfriend's name? Because let's be honest, you don't have a girlfriend." And probably she was trying to be welcoming and inviting, but it really felt like I was being cornered, and it felt like this outing moment when I was not prepared. And so that's been the case where I've had to actually clarify that I don't have a wife, I have a husband. So I can totally relate to that part. And it doesn't surprise me that it came up. I'm actually glad it did, because otherwise it would mean that someone's hiding something, right? So there's that part. But the one that surprised me is in alignment to what Anthony and Lidi just shared. It's the fact that people are hesitant to come to HR. As an HR practitioner myself and a gay person, I may have some bias in this on this side. I thought we were a safe space, and this is clearly not the general experience. And to me, perception is reality. And if people are not perceiving it, it means that we have work to do to become a safe space for others to come and share and see us as allies. So HR should be the role model. It should be us embodying it and building trust. And as HR practitioners, we should be getting training, living, breathing it. However, it's important to say we cannot know everything. Just like Anthony just shared, there's so many identities out there, people really living their lives in so many different ways that we couldn't possibly grasp everything. And we don't have to. As HR, I believe that we can make the space for the 2SLGBTQ plus community to come, speak, be loud, for us to listen and meet them where they are. I was just earlier talking to our D&I manager at Hootsuite, Gabby, and she told me something that really stuck to me. Nothing about me without me. So rather than putting out their policies that we think are what's best for our employees, let's listen to what the community actually wants. Let's make the space for them to speak up and put something in practice as a consequence of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting you all commented on the hesitation to share with HR. And I recall in the research that some of that was tied back to those subtle forms of discrimination within that theme. And I remember one of the quotes from someone that we included in the report from the survey said, I don't want, like, I'm worried about kind of talking to HR about someone on my team because we're a really small team, and if they get in trouble and when we lose them. And so it's interesting, like when you look at it, those subtle forms become a really challenging point because there's, implied big consequences that might align to talking to HR about that. So there can be other ways, maybe an anonymous feedback loops or other ways to capture that. So thank you guys so much. And so as we mentioned, from those themes came 15 recommendations in the report. I won't run through all of them, but I will reference you guys. You could look at the version of the report that's in the chat that is the overview. A few of those include access to resources and education, addressing assumptions, creating safe spaces, formalizing feedback mechanisms, gender disclosure procedures, and visibility of 2SLGBTQ plus people in the ecosystem, and more. So I'm curious from our panel, when you looked at that list of 15, are there some of those recommendations that you already have implemented or put into place? And what does it look like when you take that off paper and you put it into practice within your organizations? So maybe I'll start with Anthony first. Maybe you could share what's going on at Traction on Demand and give us a bit of insight.
Yeah, totally. And it's so nice to see so many recommendations. And, I love seeing the variety in here. By no means have we hit all of these yet. There's definitely stuff to aspire to here. I think, you guys have already heard that, we're embarked on the diversity data piece, and that has a variety of different questions that we ask. And so, sexual identity is a part of it for sure. And then there's certainly some other pieces as well. And so we're making great progress on having that data, and then trying to look at creating metrics that allow us to understand how we're doing. And so we're working on that Currently, we're really just trying to drive our response rates so that we feel like we've got a really great representative sample. And so we're trying to drive those up as high as we possibly can. And then we'll be really trying to start to target some KPIs in the future of where we want to get to. But we just want to make sure that the sample is as representative as it could be. Definitely, there's some great things going on. We just wrapped up a Pride Month, and we have an awesome equity team at Traction. And one of the great things that we did this year that was new was to invite participation for some of the queer folks in our organization to be able to share their story, totally voluntary. And it was a wonderful opportunity to help take these folks and sort of allow them to shine and talk about their stories, which are also, tough. But I think it was really great for a lot of folks to learn what that experience has been like for some other folks to start to build their understanding. And so that's been really cool. I think we're working on resources. I don't think that we have that yet, but I think that's probably close. And then there's so much more to do. I'm happy to be very loud and proud and kind of in a leadership position. And there are some other great leaders in Traction as well that identify as queer, and which is great. And like to continue to highlight those folks and show that there's a path for everybody, no matter how you identify. So that's really cool. But yeah, there's always more to do for sure.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. It's a process and will continue. Maybe I'm curious, what about at Hootsuite? I'll pass it to you, Ankel.
Absolutely. So, I was very happy to see that there were several where we've had an initiative, or maybe we have already closed it all together. But I'll start with creating a safe space. And I believe that part really comes down to the corporate culture. And just recently, we went through the process of redefining our values, and they became what we now call our guiding principles. And one of the things we did was include a guiding principle, one team, that it's all about making Hootsuite a place where everyone feels safe, welcome, valued, and empowered to do their best work without compromising who they are. And that was our first step in creating this environment for the 2SLGBTQ community, but also to other underrepresented groups where you can come to work, be the best, bring the best self and yourself to work without worrying about what others will say. And that will create the safe space from a cultural perspective. So we are all going and trying to embody these guiding principles at every single time. So it's important that everyone feels like they belong, like experience psychological safety at every moment. So we hold everyone accountable for this, but through our guiding principles. We've also been doing a lot of focus to LGBTQ learning programs for the people team, specifically our talent acquisition team, who is really at the forefront of hiring, and they have a lot of power to hire diverse talent, and so that we can bring them. And that's just the first step, right? But we've also been doing a lot of work with our people leaders so that they also understand what the experiences are. We have been partnering closely with Pride at Work Canada. They've been amazing partners to help us drive these initiatives and drive inclusive policies and benefits. For example, we just had an all-gender washroom in Vancouver. We added an inclusive girl health benefits for the 2SLGBTQ plus individuals, fertility, paternity leaves, gender affirmation surgery. We recognize that there's often a lot of stress in the life situations, right? So every single person goes through life situations, whether it's getting married, having a child, going through different processes, and we wanted to make sure that no one was excluded and everyone had the benefits that would really help them address those life events without an issue.
Wonderful. So much going on. And Lidi at Eastside Games, I'd love to hear, what are you doing that's working really well? What are some of the initiatives you guys have in place?
Sure, yeah. So, in terms of like actually addressing the key recommendations, education and resources, we have a diversity library that's available at Jackson's General Store that people can sign up books for free. We also have a few ERGs, and we have kind of weekly meetups about diversity and inclusion for people that want to be part of that conversation. Those are employee-led groups. Resources, like I mentioned, so we have the diversity library, but we also have a channel in which we post things almost every day about, what's going on in the news and how people are making an impact in terms of this field. Networking, again, like we have Slack channels, and we used to have meetups back when we used to be able to see each other in person. We just celebrated the Eastside Games Summer of Pride. So that was from June to August to capture all of the different Pride weeks that happen across Canada where our people are located. What else do we have here? Yeah, leadership programs, like I said, we could do better at getting more queer trans representation at a senior level, but we're working on that. And we do donation match for every cause that we support. So it was community in Vancouver during the Summer of Pride, as well as a few other smaller organizations, and we'll always match employee donations. And then the last one I want to mention was just with regards to stories from LGBTQ plus leaders. Like I mentioned, we're making the RuPaul game. So in the creation of that title, we not only hired an amazing lead artist who is also a drag queen, but a lot of the people that work on that game are queer. And we also reached out to the drag community as a whole, primarily in Ontario, to get some real stories and to make sure we were being authentic. So I think that was really meaningful for a lot of people at the studio to know that we were doing our research and making sure we got shit right.
For sure. And yeah, I know. Well, it's so interesting, like hearing from all of you, because obviously you guys are kind of leaders within the tech space in the area of diversity and inclusion, and you have a lot on the go already. But of the 15, I'm sure there were a few that might have been a call to action, even for yourselves. So I'm curious, it's hard to ask everyone to take on all 15 today, like sign up for every single one, but I definitely would ask it of the panel and of the audience that maybe you can find one or two that you could tackle and take on, and then take on a few more after that. So I'm curious from our panel, were there a few on there that you're going to add to your to-do list, and what were they? So maybe I'll go back to you, Lidi, because I think you mentioned the leadership programs was an area of interest for you.
Yeah, for sure. So that's definitely one of those things. But the one that I really wanted to talk about, and I mentioned it earlier, was recommendation 4 and 5 with regards to data collection and disclosure procedures, and how to do that in a meaningful and thoughtful and respectful way in order to affect like really amazing, positive, incredible change at the studio. So if anyone has any suggestions, I would love to know, but that's going to be my priority for sure.
Okay. I'm sorry, Anthony, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Not that I know that you don't want to be the in-house expert, but you have a bit of a case study in progress. So maybe you can share with us like how you embarked on that journey. Like what were your first steps? What did you have to take into consideration?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about the data piece, and you're right. It's definitely a work in progress. I think there are a lot of partnerships to getting this off the ground. And so making sure that you've got all the right people working together. That includes, understanding your own systems so that you can do the data capture in a way that makes sense. For larger organizations, that's probably your HRIS system. For smaller organizations, you need something secure. Just so folks are aware, Google Drive and Google Forms can be a secure way of storage as long as it's owned by your organization and you've got an IT team to make sure that you can secure it, which is nice. So there's the actual gathering. There is legal, certainly needs to be involved, because right now in Canada, this data collection process is not specifically legal. It sort of falls into a gray area. And so as the organization embarks on this, the powers that be really need to sign off on the legal implications of doing this to make sure that everyone is on board with that. From my perspective, I think, things in the gray area of legality is because that's where change gets driven all the time. And so, there's lots of other organizations that are gathering this data. You're not alone, but yeah, it is new. And so there's some risk there. And if you operate in multiple countries, then of course the legal requirements are different for each geography. So that's something to be aware of. And then there's how to actually ask people for this information, and finding ways to not other folks through your data collection by using the right language is really, really important. Making sure that they understand how the data is going to be used, who's going to have access to it. There are some really great resources. I think it was the province of Ontario. I found some really extensive work being done there on all of the pieces to think about as you go through that process. I can try to look up the links and send it to you, Erica, if you want, and then you guys can have that on hand. But yeah, that was a really great reference for trying to get everything right. Because I think, because this information is so sensitive, and I think in a lot of the materials that we released, we identified that, yes, this is some of the most sensitive information that we could be asking you for, and being really clear that we understand that, and here's what we're going to do with it, and being really specific about every piece of it, including, how long are we keeping this for? Are we still going to have it after you leave or not? What if you have to change some of this stuff? Because we know for folks, this data can change over time as well. And so is there a process for making sure that happens? And so, yeah, I think make sure you've got the right people on board for the beginning. Start early, and you need to certainly over communicate everything about the why and how you're going to make sure that people are safe, because you can do all these things right and it still is hard to get all the right data. Because I think, to be honest, I think we did 95% of everything right, and we're still working on trying to make sure that we're getting folks to provide us this information so that we can really get an accurate picture. And I think we're not alone. Lots of other companies are also, and bigger companies than us, are working on trying to do this and go through some of the same similar challenges. And so I think it's a long-term thing for us. And I think as we do some of these other recommendations, we're also going to be continuing to drive the data collection. Yeah, I'm happy to nerd out with some folks on it if they want to, so let me know. I think for us, we keep spinning around the idea of ERGs, and I would love to get one of those going. If it were up to me and I had so much, and I had a lot more time, I would just go and do it. But I think we're trying to build a more fulsome strategy around that, and so it's not just the LGBTQ 2S ERG. There's likely other other groups that want to have one. So that's in the works. I realized that I totally missed all of the philanthropic stuff that we do at Traction, which is terrible, whirlwind there. But yeah, I mean, obviously sponsoring this, and we just wrapped up a donation campaign with Community. We do a lot of work with the Trevor Project in the US and philanthropy with them. I'm not going to get into those. There's a bunch of other stuff that I just feel like I was remiss in saying. But yeah, ERGs is the one that I'm hoping that we circle around in the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay, interesting. And Lidi, I think you mentioned you have some ERGs in place. Do you have any tips to share with Anthony on how to kind of get those up and running, or how to run them effectively? What was your experience? And sorry, I'm dipping back, and then I'm going to come to you on Kill next.
Yeah, no, I think for us, what worked is getting, getting people that were part of the team to lead it. So it isn't HR run. It isn't run by leadership or communications or marketing. It's run by the people that are passionate and have knowledge in these things. And so the one that we have right now is a general diversity and inclusion one. So that kind of covers our major pillars, which is 2SLGBTQ+, Indigenous people in tech, and then women in tech. So we post articles and we have amazing conversation about things to do with all of that. But I would love to see in the future, as we continue to grow, that those things split up into some more specific tailored areas as the team wants to do it. It's asking a lot of somebody to be vulnerable and to spend their time and to lead those things. And so, you never want to push it, but if people want to step up and do that, then we're all for it.
Awesome. All right. I'll bring it over to you, Ankhil. And it was the question, because it was a little while ago, but of the 15 recommendations, which key ones were you looking at to add to your to-do list? And also, if you want to provide any commentary on the data or the ERG.
Sure do. Absolutely. Well, you know what, I mean, talking about ERGs, that's our next step. Absolutely. I think it's ERGs are cornerstones in any D&I strategy. And we're looking at implementing not only the 2S LGBTQ plus ERG, but other ERGs, because that's where really you get the richness of the community. And ERGs, what's interesting is that they're usually sponsored by the organization, but driven by the community itself. And that's where you can really tap into the genius of those people that make up the community. That's where you can go in and listen to what they want. And so, I mean, it's just critical to have them in place, and we recognize that. And in Q4, so that's in the next 3 months, we will be launching them, and hopefully we will be getting a lot of volunteers to join in. In my experience, ERGs are also an amazing place to go in and implement leadership programs, mentorship programs. I always go back to this study that Deloitte did many years ago about, it was for women, but I think it actually applies to a lot of underrepresented groups, and that is that mentorship and sponsorship is the one thing that can help break the glass ceiling. And that is true for so many groups. And if that would be our next step. So ERGs first, so that we can understand who they are, what they want to develop, how they like to be mentored, and then a mentorship program that would help us really bring them and make it more visible. And that goes to the recommendation of bringing visibility up for the community. We need them to be there front and center. We need them to be there leading projects. We need them to be there showcasing, and not because they have to do more, because that's one thing when I always think about leadership programs. It's not that underrepresented groups have something to prove. It's just that we often lack the visibility. And that's because we're often overseen for things. We're often not deemed what executive leadership presence would generally look like. And whether it is because you're more soft-spoken, or maybe because you've got a lisp, and all these things that come in the way and make our identities. I know myself having this, I tend to go to my higher registry when I speak, and that's gotten me out of opportunities because people may feel I'm not the best speaker. So those type of things get in the way, while creating these spaces where people live, put out ideas, are able to drive it, then that's where we're hoping to move the needle and get mentorship programs in. And of course, education will continue to be for front and center. We just did a lot of education for Pride Month, but we're continuing to do it because, as I heard very recently, we're queer all year, and we want to be celebrating Pride every single month, every single time, and giving that visibility.
Angel, I'm so glad that you mentioned that about feeling safe. Sorry if I'm jumping in, or maybe this is the answer to your next question, but I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Is that I think that really is the first step with any sort of mentorship or any sort of leadership program, or any of that, is even training on like how to have that voice and like those initial steps, because I know, like, being a woman in the industry even 10 years ago, like, I felt like I was small and that I didn't have a seat at the table. And even like, that would be what I would implement first, is just to be like, you're valid and you have a voice and this is how to use it. And I think that, you know, we're asking people to make these big sweeping moves and changes when really it's like, this is how you sit down. This is how you like hold yourself and your body language, and how you approach somebody with something that you want without apologizing. And like, I think all of that is really the step zero to what we want to achieve.
Yeah, claim your spot.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that could tie into the leadership programs or like professional development, and how do we kind of give people the tools that they might need. And thank you for sharing, Angel. I really appreciated that response. My next question is actually around, so it's less focused directly at you guys, but more kind of broader ecosystem. So maybe it's kind of a call to action, or maybe you can share some inspiration that, when you started your journey doing work in this space, what kind of inspired you? So the question is, for the broader ecosystem, what do you think could be done to address the challenges in the report or implement some of those recommendations? And maybe you guys can look at, to the broader tech ecosystem with your responses. I'll start back with you, Angel.
Oh, sure. So first of all, we need to bring the tech companies together and organization at large. Really, I think this is a piece of work that needs to be done in unity, and we set the example to the societies, and we nowadays have so much power. The tech industry is in a point, it's in the spotlight all the time, and we can set a significant example for society. And the one thing to consider is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a destination. It is a journey, and it takes a lot of work. It takes time, and it does not turn in immediate results. However, if you walk the path, you figure it out, you start reaping those impacts little by little, those results, and you gotta be not afraid to fail, but fail fast. Go get back on the path, move forward. It requires a leap of faith, that's for sure. It's not something that someone will come and tell you, oh, you're going to have a return of investment of this amount by next year, but rather you have to discover that along the way. It's very different for every organization, but in the end, DEI absolutely needs to be the lens through which we see everything. Not only HR efforts, but business efforts. Who are we making business with? Who are we bringing into the fold? Who are our shareholders? Everyone, if you add this lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, can become so much more rich. And the ROI, as I said, won't be immediate, but if you want something, here's what Harvard Business Review says. Increased diversity leads to greater innovation and higher revenues by 19%. So grab your revenues from last year, multiply by 19% and get excited and get on board. And that's possibly what eventually you will be able to get. It takes time, but certainly it's something that is very much needed for the business, but for the human side as well. What's more, internally, our PIPs, as we call all of our employees, they 92% of them said that they believe that a diverse and inclusive workspace is necessary for organizational growth, and as high as 93% said that they believe that we must be inclusive to attract and retain high-quality talent. So that alone is an amazing opportunity for us to come together, put these recommendations into practice, and move the needle. As an industry, we can certainly make a difference by doing so.
That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Over to you, Lidi. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So so I'm here with two tech companies, which traditionally I think are a little bit more forward thinking than games, which is kind of stuck in the past. I'm lucky enough to work for a mobile game studio in which we make counterculture IP / original IP, so we have a lot more freedom. But you know, I don't know if I'm entirely qualified to talk about the games industry in general, but AAA could use a bit of a facelift in terms of its representation, the types of games it's making, the people that are developing, designing, doing the narrative for these games. That's the only way that change will happen in my industry, is if you have people that are directly responsible for the narrative design, the story, and the game design. And those people need to be passionate about this. And I think we're several years away from that still, unfortunately. But if we can make some incremental change, I think that would be huge for the industry in general. Yeah, Angel, you talked about ROI, and I feel like you and I are probably similar in this, is that it's hard for me to justify my return on investment in the work I do in terms of philanthropy, in terms of culture creation, in terms of diversity. But there is ways to quantify that. They just don't turn into installs. And so I think having a platform in which I can talk about the good work that we're doing as a studio that isn't directly related to figures would be really nice. So still figuring that part out too.
Yeah, I like ROI. It makes good business sense. Thanks for bringing that stat, Angel, 19%. I think that's a good call to action. Anthony, what are your thoughts on kind of broader ecosystem? How do people adopt the recommendations in the report? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you just got to start committing to it and take some baby steps. Nobody expects any organization to adopt all 14 of these, 15 of these right away. That would be a massive ask for anybody. And I think all of them create positive change in organizations. And I think it's up to organizations to decide which ones are most aligned with what they're already doing that makes sense for them. But I think, there's some questions in the chat around, are folks actually looking for inclusive workplaces? And I would say they certainly are. I'm still talking to candidates these days. There's lots that are resonating with both our culture and the work that we're doing in the community, and that is a reason for them to apply. And for folks that are potentially trying to get into tech and aren't sure if they're going to be safe or not, I think when they see some of this stuff on your website, when you celebrate some of the great work that you've done or share some of those practices, it really will encourage them to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's so important to get this going. And I think we've seen lots of positive changes in our organization. I've been with Traction for 6.5 years, and I can say that our gender parity is better. It's still not great, but back in the day, I was like, one of two queer folks, and there are so many. I mean, our organization is much bigger now, but the ratio is much higher now too. I'm pleasantly surprised when I meet other queer folks in the organization that I didn't hire anymore, because people are joining our organization because they're seeing some of the stuff that's going on, and so that's so nice to see, as opposed to just being one of a couple. And so change does happen. You just need to continue to commit to it.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, the question in the chat I was going to go to, and the question was, in your experience, are employees looking for companies that specifically have inclusive workplaces? So yeah, I'm curious from the other panelists, like, are you seeing that as well? So Angel, I'm curious at Hootsuite, are employees coming to you? Like, is it a talent ROI that you're receiving from your work?
It is, absolutely. And listen, I'm going to go out on the limb and say everyone is looking for inclusive workspaces. Everyone has had whatever group you're part of, you've experienced some exclusion at a time, and you're looking for a place where you're included, that you belong, and that goes out to the groups that are usually excluded as well. So yes, I know when I joined Hootsuite, I went out and did my research and saw what they were doing, and that's part of the employee branding as well. It's important to put it out there and make sure that the world knows your wins as well as what you're working on. And I know when I joined, that was a key piece of my decision making in accepting the job and coming in, because I knew I was going to be in a place where I could be myself. So yes, and definitely yes on the talent ROI.
Yes and yes. Lidi, yes and yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the last round of interviews. I do the culture fit interview before everyone gets hired. And I hear that more often than not, that people are interested in joining Eastside Games because they've seen what we've been doing with our philanthropic efforts, which is a tough balance to strike, to be like, these are the things that are important to us, but to not seem braggy about it. So hopefully we're like striking that balance to be like, this is what we care about, and this is what we're giving our money and our time to. But that really seems to strike a chord with a lot of our applicants, to be like, I see that you're big in the LGBTQ community. I see that you are passionate about bringing BIPOC people into work in games. And so I feel like the message is hitting in the ways that we wanted to, and we're bringing in people that haven't felt as comfortable interviewing elsewhere. So that's, I think, a win for us.
Absolutely.
Just one more piece. It starts the conversation so differently when you're considering an organization. As someone who, like, I haven't interviewed in a long time for a role, but before, you would look at the public persona of this organization and you're like, okay, well, I don't see any progressive stuff here, so I'm just gonna use a non-gendered word for my partner, or like not talk about my personal life. Mm-hmm. Just tone it down, versus when you see this stuff and that maybe you can walk in and be a bit more open and authentic even on your first conversation with the organization, it starts things so differently, and it's
totally so yeah.
Great. Kind of a good follow-on in the chat as well was, maybe, where have you seen the most benefit or most impact from any of your programs or initiatives, and then maybe the voice of your employees. Like, what have you heard from your staff and employees? What have they shared with you about what it means to them? So I can maybe start back with you, Angel.
Sure. Well, I will start with the impact of from our employees, and that is that they have come to us to tell us how they are happy to be in a place where we're not only doing performative work, because a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion can fall in performative, and based on what we're hearing, they feel like we're walking the talk, and that's very important for us. We don't want to just be, we don't want it to be just a facade. We want it to be real. We want it to be experienced, and our programs have led us to do that. And on the other hand, when we think about the not underrepresented groups, they've come to us to tell us that now they're starting to open their perspectives and to learn things from a different lens, and to look at things and realize how what they deem normal is not really what's normal for everyone. It's not day to day, and so having that opportunity to shift that perspective has been key.
Awesome. Lidi, what have you heard from your employees, or what has been most impactful?
I don't know if it's the most impactful thing, but something I want to mention. So, you know, being a company that has been very committed to supportive organizations, supportive underrepresented groups for many years, I find that we get a lot of people being very vocal, whether it's in Slack or otherwise, to be like, this is something we should be caring about. And so we're getting brought these issues that are important to people individually, whether or not it's their ethnicity or their, you know, gender expression. And they're bringing things to us to be like, we know that you care about shit, and now you should care about this shit. So we're learning all the time. And I feel like that's really exciting too, that people feel comfortable to be vulnerable and to bring forward what matters to them in hopes that we can support it as a studio, or at least support it internally, and create a system for them or for those people. So that's been really exciting for me.
That's awesome. That's heartwarming for sure. Anthony, what are you hearing from staff? What's been most impactful thus far?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. Like, we have a whole team that does this stuff, and they could answer it much better than I will. And I won't. One of them is here. I'm not going to put her on the spot. But I think a really cool thing is to be able to bring everybody together and talk about what do we want to work on as a group, and really commit to some goals together, and also just hear a variety of folks and what they think. We actually did like a big group planning session on what are the priorities for our justice and equity work, and then how do we, you know, put some plans together, put some metrics together, and then report back on it. So really getting really public with what the strategy is and what the focus is, I think is great, because then it's a topic of conversation that we can point to, that we can go back to, that we can check in on a regular basis, and then make the updates and say, hey, here's the next part of the roadmap that we're going to focus on. I think it allows people to have an opportunity to voice what they want to get after, and then try to pull that together, and then work on some stuff, and then create future iterations down the way.
I like that. I like the idea of like setting targets, deliver on the target, set a new target, deliver on that, and keep that moving forward, right? Yeah. So I see we're at about 5 minutes to the top of the hour. I don't see there are no questions in the chat right now, but I had one kind of final question, and I might put a little bit of a spin on it, because I don't think we touched on this earlier, which is, I wanted to ask kind of what strategies, if you guys were to say, hey, people on our audience today, like, here's one strategy that has worked well, or that I think is easily implementable today, like that you guys could take away from my experience, and being thoughtful to different sizes of companies. And I think this, we've chatted about this before, it came up in the research, where some organizations, you know, they may have an HR lead, but they don't have someone who is fully dedicated to work within this space. So thinking about companies of different sizes, like what can they do to consider how they support 2SLGBTQ people in their organizations or within the ecosystem at large. So maybe I'll go to Angel first, because I'm enjoying this order. So I'll go to you first, if that's okay.
Sounds perfect, yeah. Well, a very simple one that comes to mind is to drive conversations before education, if you don't have the resources to put together a full program, drive the conversations, bring in the people who are courageous that want to speak up, and share lived experiences. We learn better from storytelling than from facts and slides and things like that. So just come together, have a conversation, create those safe spaces, and that can go a long way.
That's wonderful. That's great. Lidi, what do you think?
And sure, I was going to say the same thing kind of in different words, but just like to shut the up and listen to what people are saying. And I was actually going to give the example of like, don't just make a rainbow logo and put that up for Pride Month, although I'm like literally wearing the shirt that we made for Pride Month that does exactly that. But I digress. But yeah, listening to who wants to take that leadership, who wants to tell their stories, and listening to those quiet voices that might be a little bit shy to speak out, and nurturing those spaces. And maybe that's creating relationships with, you know, someone like me. I worked in HR at the studio for years and years, and some people still want to talk to me versus the HR team, and figuring out just how to appeal to the people that might be more quiet and more shy and more reserved on that, and how to tell those stories as well.
That's awesome. Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. Find those champions who want to be loud, and figure out how you can, you know, push them up in front of everybody in a way that feels good for them, because I think that's a great place to start. And I would caution against some of the bigger moves to start with. Like, I had a friend who works in consulting, and their organization started to get really excited about adding pronouns to like their signatures and their Zoom links, and their leader wanted to try to enforce this with everybody, and there's like some unintended consequences of this kind of stuff that can happen. So be careful with the sweeping changes that you make. I think it's an invitation to have people participate in all of these things, as opposed to forcing folks, and then you might cause something to happen that you didn't really intend to. So
this is honestly such a fascinating conversation. I thank you guys so very much for your time and for all the amazing work you're doing and all the work to come.